Have you ever stopped just for a second to think about what might happen if everything just went quiet? I mean, not just quiet, but silent. If the constant hum of life, the buzz of phones, the endless stream of news and updates, if it all just vanished.
That's a pretty stark thought, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
What kind of connections might pop up then, when all the usual noise is gone? Not just between people, but maybe inside ourselves. What could possibly surface when all the things we rely on, all our comforts are just pulled away?
Yeah.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into this really extraordinary story, a first-hand account coming out of West Texas. It takes place right after a massive solar storm hits.
All right, this isn't science fiction. This is based on someone's experience.
Exactly. And in this world that's suddenly plunged into total darkness, complete silence, an absolutely astonishing voice starts to emerge, not just, giving directions, but offering something much deeper, a kind of transformation. So our mission here is to really unpack this, to look at all the layers of this incredible story, how people react when everything familiar is just gone, and that deep search for meaning that seems to kick in.
That fundamental human need.
Right. And we're drawing this from our source material, which is called Excerpts from the Voice After the Storm. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here, right from the start, is thinking about the human condition when you flip the script.
Yeah.
We live in this age of just information overload, constant input.
Non-stop.
Exactly. And then suddenly imagine absolute scarcity, nothing. This account gives us this really unique window into the psychological shock, the sociological impact of being totally disconnected. When the ways we understand the world, predict things, even just talk to each other, when they just vanish. Well, this almost primal need comes bubbling up, this longing for guidance, for some kind of reassurance.
Anything, a sign.
Precisely. Any signal that you're not completely alone, adrift. And the narrator's story, it just captures that feeling so powerfully, that desperate search for clarity, for purpose, in what's essentially become a void. It really speaks to our deep need for order,
What a void it was. I mean, the way the narrator describes his life before the storm. Yeah, he's a rancher, right? Out in West Texas. Pretty rugged life, you'd think.
You'd think quiet, maybe.
Exactly. But he says it was anything but. He calls it the constant buzz. And it wasn't just like background noise. It was technology everywhere.
And out there.
Yeah, the hum from the generator running all the time, the TV just droning on, news shows, whatever. His wife, Sarah, he says, was always on the phone talking to her sister, friends. Just this constant murmur.
Familiar sounds of modern life, yeah.
And then, of course, the world in your pocket. The cell phones, always there, always buzzing, pulling your attention, constant updates, notifications.
The digital tether we all have now.
Yeah. He looks back on it now, and it's kind of chilling. He says, "We thought it was normal. We thought it was life. We were wrong."
Wow. That hits hard.
Doesn't it? It's like they were living this life where real connection maybe took a backseat to just being connected digitally. He also remembers the warnings about the storm. Big ones. Once-in-a-century solar storm, they called it.
But people tend to tune those out, don't they?
That's exactly what he said happened.
Yeah.
Most folks, him included at first, just shrugged it off. Another headline, another scary thing that feels kind of abstract, far away.
Just more noise, ironically.
Yeah, too much information makes it hard to actually hear the important stuff sometimes.
And that description, it just nails our modern dependency, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just the gadgets themselves, it's the flow, the constant stream of information they provide. We built this whole society that just assumes constant connection, instant answers.
Yeah.
That fire hose of data, that's become our baseline. It's literally defined what feels normal to us.
Yeah, it really has.
So this story, it sets the stage perfectly to show just how jarring, how psychologically shattering it is when that flow just stops dead. Our whole way of navigating the world, making sense of things, it gets fundamentally challenged.
Yeah.
That idea of normal isn't just disrupted, it's instantly rewritten. It really shows how fragile our sense of control actually is.
And that fragility became terrifyingly real when the storm hit. He describes it so vividly. He was out just mending a fence line, doing ranch work.
Mundane tasks.
Totally mundane. And then the sky, he said it started looking sick. That's the word he uses. Sick. The colors were wrong, bleeding into these sickly greens and purples he'd never seen before. Not like a normal sunset.
Eerie.
Incredibly eerie. And then there was this sound, or more like a feeling, a low, deep thrumming. He said he felt it in your bones, right through the soles of your boots, like something huge and unseen was vibrating the whole world.
Primal fear territory there.
Absolutely. And then, just like that, it stopped. Everything, the thrumming gone, the power at the ranch house, dead. His tractor wouldn't even turn over.
Oh, wow. Even mechanical stuff.
Yeah, not just electrical. And the cell phones, just dead pieces of glass and plastic, useless, inert,
Cut off.
completely. And the darkness that night, he describes it as total, complete darkness, a kind of darkness we hadn't known since our great-grandparents' time. Just this oppressive, thick blackness really hammered home the isolation.
Yeah.
But he says the first few days weren't about, loud panic like you see in movies. It was different. He called it quiet chaos.
That distinction is so important, this quiet chaos. It's not the noise of explosions or riots, it's the fear that seeps in.
Yeah.
The gnawing uncertainty when everything you rely on just dissolves.
Right, the not knowing.
Exactly. When he says no news, no connection, it's more than just the power being out. It's the loss of understanding. What's happening out there?
Mhm.
Our loved ones okay? Is help coming? Can help come?
Total vacuum.
Total vacuum. Leaving, as he puts it, just us and the oppressive, deafening silence. It creates this feeling of being utterly alone, completely cut off.
Yeah.
And this immediately raises an important question. How do people cope?
Yeah.
How do individuals, how do communities adapt when their main way of getting information, of connecting, just vanishes, leaves them sort of floating in the unknown?
That really is the core of it, because in that silence, that really deep, unnerving silence, something new started to happen for him, for his wife, Sarah. He says, it's in that kind of silence that you really start to listen.
Listening differently, you mean?
Yeah, not just straining your ears, it was deeper. Paying attention to things you'd normally ignore, like the tiny sounds, the wind, the animals at night, maybe even just the sounds inside yourself, your own heartbeat.
The internal landscape becomes louder when the external one goes quiet.
Exactly. The lack of distraction forces you inward. And crucially, he says, very honestly, and you pray. Boy, did we pray. It wasn't just a casual thing. It was this deep, almost instinctive turn towards something bigger, towards spirituality, God as the only place left to find comfort or guidance or just hope when everything else had failed.
That really tracks with what we understand about human psychology in extreme situations. When our usual ways of making sense of the world break down, when control is just gone,
Yeah.
there's this very common, very human tendency to seek meaning elsewhere, to look for a higher power, or to see events through a kind of divine lens.
Desperation opens doors, maybe.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Desperation can absolutely be a catalyst. It can push people towards types of perception or towards faith that maybe they wouldn't have considered in normal times, in times of comfort and predictability.
Right.
It's fundamental.
Yeah.
We try to make sense of chaos. And when the usual explanations don't work, when practical solutions aren't there, turning to the spiritual offers a framework. It helps make sense of suffering, find solace, maybe even feel some agency again. It's a powerful coping mechanism.
And you can feel that desperation building as the days went by. A full week into this silence, he describes the routine: carefully rationing food, fuel for the lantern. The nights getting colder, lonelier.
The isolation must have been immense.
He paints this picture, just sitting there, staring into the flame, wondering if we were the only ones left. That thought being the last ones, just hanging in the air.
Chilling.
It really is. And it's in that bleakness, that stripped down reality, that this memory surfaces. His dad's old shortwave radio.
Old tech.
Yeah, a dusty relic, he calls it. Back of the workshop, hadn't been touched in maybe 20 years. Powered by a hand crank.
Wow, back to basics.
Totally. It felt like this irrational last-ditch hope. He brings it in, starts cranking, hour after hour, just static, endless static.
Exhausting work too, hand cranking.
Oh, yeah. He says Sarah, his wife, thought I was losing my mind. Just watching him crank away at this dead box. His arm ached. He was ready to give up. Heart just heavy with despair. And then he just prays. A really simple, raw prayer. Lord, please, just a sign. Let us know you're still there.
Not even asking for rescue, just a sign. Acknowledgement.
Exactly. Just a sign that they weren't utterly alone.
That moment really highlights something profound. How old, forgotten technology can suddenly become vital when our complex modern systems collapse.
Like a hidden backup plan we didn't know we had.
Precisely. That dusty relic becomes the lifeline. It speaks volumes about resilience, about resourcefulness when things get truly dire. But it's more than just the physical act of cranking.
Right, the prayer.
Yeah, his persistence, fueled by sheer desperation and faith. It shows how those two things intertwine, pushing through hopelessness, clinging to the slimmest chance, because the need for some kind of answer, some light in the darkness is just so overwhelming. It's where that psychological drive meets a spiritual yearning.
And then it happened. Against all odds, after days of static, he gives the dial one last tiny turn, just going through the motions, probably.
Not really expecting anything.
No. And through the static, a voice. Clear as a bell, but like nothing he'd ever heard. He says it was calm, clear, deeper and more resonant than any voice had ever heard. Not frantic, not human, almost. Like it filled the room.
Whoa.
And it just said 3 words, be still.
Be still, powerful.
And then gone. Instantly back to static. He just freezes, hand in midair, mind racing. Did I imagine that? Am I cracking up?
The doubt must have hit immediately.
Immediately. But then he looks over at Sarah, and her eyes are wide, staring at him. Same shock. She heard it too.
The shared experience. That's crucial.
Totally crucial. It anchored it, made it real, at least for them in that moment. His heart's pounding, terror mixed with maybe hope. He starts cranking like crazy again, fiddling with the dial.
Trying to get it back.
Desperately. But nothing. For another whole day, just static. The silence felt even heavier then, he said. And yeah, the doubt crept back in. Was it just a shared delusion? Stress?
Understandable. The mind plays tricks under pressure. But the impact of that single message,
Yeah.
be still, in that absolute information vacuum, it's immense.
Yeah.
The brevity, the directness, it's more than just an instruction. It's like an invocation of peace, a call to find calm within the chaos. Exactly what you'd crave when everything outside is terrifying and uncertain.
It lands differently in that context.
Completely. And the fact they both heard it, that shared perception is psychologically vital. It lifts it out of the realm of purely personal hallucination into something. Well, something objectively experienced by the two of them.
Right, makes it harder to dismiss.
Exactly. Even with the static returning, even with the doubt, that shared moment plants this powerful seed, this possibility of something extraordinary.
Yeah.
It would be incredibly hard to just shake that off. It speaks to how we validate experiences, especially under extreme stress.
And that seed, it didn't just wither, it grew. Because the very next evening, he felt this pull, had to try again.
Couldn't let it go.
Couldn't let it go. And there it was again. Same frequency. Same calm, deep voice cutting through the static.
Wow, so it wasn't a one-off.
No. And this time the message was different, but just a short. Tend to your flock.
Tend to your flock, okay.
Now he's a rancher, right? So his first thought is literal. I have a literal flock of sheep, he acknowledges. But he says instantly, deep down, I knew. I knew in my soul it meant more than that.
An intuitive understanding.
Absolutely. It felt like more than just farm advice. So the next day, acting on this feeling, this imperative, he takes some of their supplies, which are already running low.
Risky.
Very. And he doesn't go to his sheep. He goes down the road to their elderly neighbors, the Hendersons. Their generator had died completely. They were cold, probably scared. He shares their food, their fuel.
Wow. Taking it metaphorically.
Yeah. And he says it just felt right, like I was following an order, like an inner compass pointed him there. And this became the pattern.
The voice kept coming.
Each night, he says, always short, always profound. Messages like, love your neighbor, forgive freely, my peace I give you.
Basic tenets, but amplified in that situation.
Hugely amplified. He called the messages a well of living water in a desert of silence, a lifeline really, both spiritual and practical. And he makes this connection himself. He compares it to the prophet Elijah.
Ah, the still small voice.
Exactly. Not in the wind, not in the earthquake or fire, but in the quiet. He says, this was our still small voice. His community's voice.
You know, that progression is really interesting. From this enigmatic be still to these very practical, ethical, spiritual instructions.
It's quite a journey.
It really shows a shift, doesn't it? From just reacting to the crisis to actively taking moral action within it. And the guidance itself is fascinating. It's both deeply spiritual and intensely practical.
Like tend your flock means literally help your neighbor.
Precisely. It works on both levels.
Yeah.
It gives a concrete action and a broader sense of community responsibility. The narrator, acting on it immediately, sharing resources. It shows how that perceived divine guidance can directly fuel compassionate, life-saving behavior. And drawing those parallels to well-known stories, like Elijah, it helps frame the experience. It gives it meaning within a tradition they understand, making it feel significant, legitimate, It provides a kind of script for how to act in this completely new world.
And then came the moment that, for him, cemented everything. The unshatterable proof, he calls it. This was about 2 weeks in.
Okay.
The voice gives a very specific warning. The bridge at Willow Creek is gone. Tell the others, go by the high ridge.
Very specific, verifiable.
Extremely. And Willow Creek, that bridge, it wasn't just some crossing. It was about 10 miles east, and it was the only way to get to the nearest town for supplies, food, medicine, anything.
So a critical route.
Absolutely critical. And here's the kicker. He and some other ranchers were already planning to make that dangerous trip the very next morning. They were running out of everything.
Wow. Talk about timing.
Right. So he tells the other guys what the voice said about the bridge being out, and their reaction.
Skepticism, I bet. Laughter.
Exactly. Laughter, disbelief. They looked at me like I was crazy, he says. He felt totally alone in it for a minute.
That must have been tough, putting yourself out there like that.
Yeah. But then, this older cowboy, Dale, speaks up, says, Jed, my wife heard it too on her little battery-powered radio. She heard the same thing.
Whoa, confirmation.
Big time confirmation.
Yeah.
The laughter stops. And then another guy's son, who had a ham radio setup, says he heard the exact same message too.
Multiple sources.
Yeah.
Different radios.
Yeah, that's when it hit them all. This wasn't just my radio. It was coming through on different radios, on different frequencies, all across our valley. The same voice. The same message.
Incredible.
For the narrator, that was it. Proof positive. This was no coincidence. This was an appointment with the Almighty. So they listened. They took the hard way, the high ridge route.
And the bridge.
When they got to where they could see Willow Creek, the bridge was just gone, completely washed away, a gaping chasm where it used to be.
Oh my God.
He says, flat out, the voice, it had saved our lives. It was the Lord. It had to be.
That is profoundly dramatic. And it perfectly illustrates the power of shared experience in validating something extraordinary.
It changes everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What starts as one person's possibly questionable experience, it becomes a collective, undeniable reality when multiple independent people confirm the exact same, very specific message.
On different devices, too.
Right, that detail is key.
Yeah.
It moves from subjective belief to something that feels, well, objective within that group. And the fact that it was a specific, verifiable prediction, the bridge's location, its destruction, that lends enormous credibility.
It's not just vague guidance anymore.
No, this was concrete life or death information that proved true. If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about how that collective experience, that shared salvation, must amplify faith and belief within that community. It forges this incredibly strong bond, this shared reality that just overshadows any lingering individual doubt. It makes the potentially supernatural feel tangible, real, with immediate life-saving consequences that could reshape a whole community's identity.
And it absolutely did reshape them. That shared experience wasn't just a one-off miracle. It kicked off this ongoing transformation. The voice kept guiding them.
Practical stuff too.
Yeah, really practical. He says, it told us which wells still had clean water, which is vital out there. It told us who was sick and needed help so they could focus their terror where it was needed most.
Wow, like a central dispatcher almost.
Kind of. And this constant, reliable, life-sustaining guidance, he says, it turned a bunch of scared, isolated individuals into a family, a true flock guided by a shepherd we could only hear.
That flock metaphor again.
It really resonated. They started living differently. He explicitly compares it to the early church in the Bible. We were living out the book of Acts, sharing everything we had, caring for one another.
A truly communal existence.
Totally. Pooling resources, making decisions together, mutual aid became the norm. And this led to this radical shift in perspective. The power grid being down, the initial disaster, it stopped feeling like a disaster. He says, it seemed like a mercy, a way for God to quiet the world so we could finally hear him.
That is a powerful reframing, seeing catastrophe as grace almost, as an opportunity.
Incredible, isn't it?
It really is. And it speaks directly to how pro-social behavior, strong community bonds can emerge in crisis, especially when there's this unifying purpose or, like here, a perceived higher guidance.
Gives people something to rally around.
Exactly. The flock and shepherd metaphor, it provides that sense of order, protection, shared identity when all the usual structures are gone. There's immense psychological comfort and strength in that shared belief, that common purpose. It helps people not just survive, but actually build something new and meaningful out of the chaos. And that reinterpretation of disaster as mercy, that's profound. It shows how humans adapt by constructing shared meaning, even in the face of overwhelming hardship.
But like all storms, this one eventually ended. Things started coming back online. Slowly, power was restored. The radios, they fell silent again.
The voice stopped.
Just as mysteriously as it started, it stopped. The period of direct guidance was over. But he says very clearly, we were never the same. We had been changed.
You couldn't go back after that.
No way. The big takeaway for them, the lesson that stuck, was that, in their view, God is always speaking.
Just maybe not always through a radio.
Right. They learned to hear that voice or recognize that guidance in other ways. Through the Bible, he says, through the kindness of a neighbor, through the quiet whispers in your own heart. If you actually pause to listen. The problem, he reflects, for us now, is that we've filled our lives with so much noise, so much static, that we've forgotten how to listen.
That idea of static is so resonant, isn't it? It's the literal noise, the phone buzzing, the TV.
Yeah.
But it's also the metaphorical noise. The information overload, the constant demands on our attention, the mental chatter.
Yeah.
It makes finding real silence, real space for introspection incredibly difficult in our world.
It really does.
And this story suggests that pretty powerfully that maybe those deeper insights, whether you see them as spiritual or personal breakthroughs, they often require turning down that volume, deliberately quieting things down, inside and out.
Making space for the quiet.
Exactly. Creating intentional quiet space to process, reflect, maybe perceive things we'd otherwise miss in the daily rush.
So the narrator, looking back, he offers what he calls a gentle warning and some advice based on his faith and experience.
Yeah.
He basically says, don't wait for a solar storm to knock out your world before you decide to tune in.
Proactive listening.
Yeah. Find your quiet place. For him, it's about opening the Bible, listening for that still small voice, because he believes he is there, he is waiting, and his message is the only one that truly matters.
A message of faith born from extreme experience.
Absolutely. And, in telling his story, he apparently encouraged people who were moved by it, people who shared his faith, to engage, to subscribe to wherever he was sharing it, to comment amen as a sign of belief, to like it, share it, suggesting his story itself might be the sign someone else needed, someone lost in their own static, to start listening.
That's interesting. Using the tools of the modern noisy world to share a message about finding quiet.
Kind of ironic, but yeah, that seemed to be part of his conviction, sharing the message he felt he'd received.
Well, regardless of one's personal beliefs about the voice itself, his call to listen, whether you take it spiritually or metaphorically, it's powerful.
Yeah, it resonates either way.
It taps into something universal. That search for meaning, for guidance. We all have that storm or no storm. We're all trying to navigate uncertainty, find clarity. The story really underscores that need to connect, to understand, is always there. Sometimes it just needs us to quiet down enough to notice it, to tune in.
Yeah, what a journey we've taken today, really digging into this incredible story from West Texas. The storm, the silence, this voice emerging from the static.
It's unforgettable.
Truly. Seeing how individuals, how a whole community was changed by it. So what does this all mean? Maybe for us living in our busy, noisy world,
Yeah.
maybe it's just a reminder to deliberately turn down our own static sometimes.
The internal and the external noise.
Yeah. The notifications, the news feeds, the mental checklists, and just try to find those moments of real quiet, real connection, real listening, those things that can get so easily drowned out.
It definitely makes you think about resilience, about faith, about how people make meaning in the most extreme circumstances. And this raises an important question. How might situations like this total disruption, actually reveal fundamental truths about us?
Yeah.
About our deepest needs for connection, for meaning, especially when all the usual sources are gone.
Yeah.
It shows this amazing human capacity for resilience, for finding faith, for forging these incredibly strong bonds when faced with the absolute unimaginable.
It really does. The story makes you wonder. What profound messages, what quiet insights, what little bits of wisdom might we be missing in our own lives just because we haven't found our own quiet place to really truly listen?